exclusive news that you brought to us a couple of weeks ago regarding the Qatar ownership not really going ahead for Manchester United, and Sir Jim Ratcliffe actually being one who's going forward with a 25% ownership stake at Manchester United. I wanted to hear from you just a bit more about how that's kind of progressed over the last couple of weeks, and are we going to see that move actually happen this season, or is it going to be a slow burner as everything tends to be at Manchester United?
Well, I know that by the time this goes out, something may have moved, because that is the sort of state we're at the moment with the Manchester United sale process. So Jim Ratcliffe is hoping at the time of recording, which is late October, that in the coming weeks, he'll be able to finalize a deal. Then you've got the completion process, and that can take some time. And the thing about a company listed on the New York Stock Exchange is the protocol will dictate that any deal has to be 100% done before it can be formally announced. But several sources intimate that it's a case of when, not if, as far as Sir Jim Ratcliffe is concerned. And I think that's partially why Sheikh Jassim pulled out when he did, because although there was a fatigue with the process and there was some skepticism maybe that the Glazers as a six wanted to sell, ultimately you pull out before you're rejected, and you pull out because perhaps you get wind that your rival is very close. So for the last 10 weeks, Sir Jim Ratcliffe has kind of pivoted from wanting a majority and controlling stake right now to 25% with an eventual path to control. And there's an agreement of principle of sorts over the 25% in terms of the stake and its corresponding valuation. And now it's a case of all of the other legalities and conversations, particularly around what sporting control and instant sporting control looks like. So there's work to be done, but there's no real panic on the Ratcliffe side that he's going to hit roadblocks. It's more about just ironing out the details before finally this sale process comes to a close. And the plan from Ineos Sports' perspective is to try and get this one fully done, all of the different aspects, whether that's the negotiations, a board vote, an announcement, the completion process, every aspect Ratcliffe wants to be done so he can have his 25% stake in time to have some kind of say or influence over the January transfer window.
Yeah, because with Sir Jim Ratcliffe as well, he's obviously the owner of DAZN Sport, and Ineos have that controlling stake in DAZN Sport in Switzerland, and they've also been owners of Nice as well, and they're only slightly getting better and better every season. But they had a public outcry last season where Dante, the former Bayern Munich centre-back, called out the ownership model that they had as well. And I just wanted to kind of know from a Man United perspective as well, what can we expect as Man United fans from Sir Jim Ratcliffe's perspective as the potential owner, and potentially the full owner with years to come as well? Because as everyone knows, that's how the Glazers got their hands on Manchester United, by partially buying lots and lots of stock and having a minority stake and then building up to it. Could we see Sir Jim Ratcliffe do the same over a number of years at Manchester United?
Well, that's always what sources within the Ineos camp have said, that this is about control. It's not about buying a small piece and then sitting back. It's about ultimately controlling the football club. I don't think we'll see a scenario or a roadmap for 100% anytime soon. Ratcliffe has always intimated that he wants control, but almost control at the minimum possible price, which is effectively either buying 50.01% of the shares or all 69% of the Glazers shares. But I don't think that Ratcliffe has ever seen too much sense in immediately delisting the public shares to get to 100%, because if you can get control at 69%, then why pay that extra 1 point whatever billion to get to 100% when you can instead use that kind of amount to invest in the football club? And that's going to be the big question from Manchester United fans in this whole process. Ratcliffe buying a stake at one amount doesn't generate enough income to renovate Old Trafford and Carrington, to invest in the men and the women's team and ultimately clear the debt. So there's definitely a question as to how capital is going to be raised. Ratcliffe could also, in addition to 25%, inject equity into the football club to get a slightly higher percentage of ownership, or he could just decide either instantly or over time to invest. And the other possibility, although Manchester United fans will raise their eyebrows, is that the Glazers use some or all of the money that Ratcliffe has invested to get his 25% stake and they put that back into the club. But it's difficult because if Ratcliffe's buying an equal percentage of A and B shares to get to his 25%, then some of the money won't be going to the Glazers. It will be going to other minority shareholders, and they obviously are going to take that money in return for selling their shares. So that money's not going to go back into the football club. So there's a fair amount of questions at the moment. Those questions may have been answered by the time people are listening to this, but there's a fair amount of questions about the specific structure on the Ratcliffe bid. And that's why this has taken time. And that's why Ratcliffe has been flexible. But in terms of eventual path to control, it is believed that that is what Ratcliffe wants. So the key question in all of this is going to be, is there an option for majority and control for Ratcliffe? Is there an obligation even? And if it's the latter, then Manchester United fans will know that at some point the Glazers are definitively leaving. If it's only an option or if it's not there at all, then at that point there'll be a lot more backlash because people will start to believe that the Glazers ran this whole process and they never really had any intention of selling. And that is a fair conclusion, but maybe they just didn't have the right offer. Maybe they just didn't have the right valuation. There was certainly less suitors than the Glazers were anticipating that have entered into this sale process. So it's been very complex. It's been difficult to cover. Caution has always been needed. And I think that the other thing is, if that point is true, that as some may conclude, the Glazers never really wanted to sell 100% of the club, then that doesn't just apply to Sheikh Jassim, it also applies to Sir Jim Ratcliffe. And therefore, maybe this 25% deal is actually the only way that Ratcliffe could have won, in inverted commas, the sale process. So this is why there's so many different complexities. And now we have to wait and see what the next step is. But Manchester United fans will want and deserve clarity as to the exact structure. So they understand, even if it's not right now, whether over time the Glazers are staying or going.
Yeah, it's true. It's one of those things that we've been waiting for a good number of years now. And the fact that they were open to negotiations within the last year or so, it's been a painstaking process as Man United fans are chanting every game at Old Trafford and away games as well, Glazers out. And it goes to show that we're nearly at the end of this whole rigmarole as Man United fans, and maybe we'll get some clarity next week. I'm not holding out for much, to be honest, because they say some things and it just doesn't happen and it gets delayed and it happens again and again and again. But hopefully, fingers crossed, by the time this podcast comes out, we will have some further clarity on Sir Jim Ratcliffe's new influence.